All right, welcome back. We are now in the final tutorials for Project 1 for Photoshop, and this section of tutorials is titled Output Formats and Files. And for this first video we're going to actually look at reviewing your work. Basically doing a final checklist inspection to make sure that everything we've designed up to this point meets specifications for project turn-in. So that's meeting basic requirements, file organization, and checking to make sure that our design of our work is accurate and well done. So I'm going to go ahead and open my file back up here. My bad. All right, we'll open that up. Okay, so here's the image we ended up with at the end of our last set of tutorials from project-specific techniques. So what we want to do first, again, before saving our work and making the final file formats, we really want to double check to make sure everything looks good at this point. So this requires a tight inspection. So the first thing that I want to check before I go too far is to make sure that the dimensional area of my canvas is correct. And hopefully this is because you would have set it up correctly at the very beginning of the project. But we can always review it really at any time during the process of development. This is just good to double check at the very end as well. So I'm going to go up to Image from the top menu bar. I'm going to go down to Image Size. Okay, so it pops up a little menu for image size, and it gives us a wealth of information here, like what size in Photoshop measurement it is in megabytes, which is about 13 megabytes. The dimensions for the document in pixels are 1920 by 2400, which we can change to measure out in different units if we want. We also are given the width and height currently set for the project, which is an 8-inch width, should be set to inches, and a 10-inch height. We also have a resolution of 240 ppi. So the good news is those are correct for our specifications. Again, when you're working on your project, yours may be a 10 by 8 horizontal document as opposed to being a vertical like our demo design here. And that's fine. It can be vertical or horizontal, but it should maintain these precise dimensional measurements for an 8-inch width, an 8-inch dimension, a 10-inch dimension, and a resolution of 240 pixels per inch. Now, if for any reason these are off, that can be problematic at this stage in the design process. First off, you don't want to change them inside this menu. Especially if the dimensions are off by like an inch in one direction. What you will do if you change it here is it will stretch your image instead of correctly extending it or extending the canvas. So let me just show you an example of that. Let's say that what I actually wanted to design was a 16 by, or an 8.5 by 11. Well, I'm off, right? Or maybe I wanted to make an 8 by 14. So let's just change this to 14. Now notice that as I do that, the width and height are locked together, so it's maintaining ratio, which is great. That means that it will automatically change the width to match whatever I do with the height, which is good. But what if the problem is that's still giving me the wrong size? Well, let's do Command Z to undo that. Let's unlock that. And now, without the width and height locked together, I can put in my independent amount. And you may notice on the preview that the image that it gives me over here is much more distorted now when I change it to 14. See, when I go back to 10, the image is no longer grabbed and stretched. But when I change it there, or even right here by 1 inch, notice how it looks on the preview. Really bad. And it still looks pretty bad right now. And that's not good. Again, you don't want to distort your photographic imagery. It's a clean giveaway that you weren't precisely controlling your design. So rather than doing that change from here, let's hit cancel. And if we have to extend canvas for any reason, we can go back to image and use canvas size. And what canvas size extension, what it does is that it will extend your canvas size out without destroying or actually modifying your imagery. So now if I enter in the number 14, it will maintain 8 inches by 14 inches. I can also tell it where to grow away from. I can anchor my top position so that it doesn't grow out an inch around there. Or I can tell it to extend from the side, so it can extend from this side of my image outward, rather than extending extra border on this side. So I'll show you the general. So here's center. This is normal. Let's say OK. I do an 8 by 14 adjustment. I'm going to zoom out. And notice what happens is that it's extended my canvas up on both ends. It's added the extra 4 inches total, which is 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. But what's funny about that is that now I can see the rest of my cloud photograph up here, which is kind of weird. I can also see more of my water layer, just a smidge on the bottom, and I have a giant white empty area. So again, when you have to extend your canvas, just realize that if you didn't design it correctly in the beginning, it could have impact on your design later. You may have to rescale objects, adjust your design to fit and match. I'm just going to Command Z here to undo that whole action. All right, so that's step 1, is checking your image size, measurements, and resolution to make sure that they are accurate and set correctly to the project specifications. Okay, the next thing we can do is go through our layer stack very quickly and make sure that we have layers renamed. Okay, and make sure that they are named according to what they should be a part of. So I've got like my vignette layer, I've got exposure controls and filters. I have a shadow layer for a person and I have another one for a person. This is a problem. Notice where it's a problem. Here's my person shadow for my person layer. Here's a person shadow for a rocks layer. That's not right. So I need to change the name for person shadows here to rocks shadows. There we go. Quick fix, but good to check on the front end. Again, when organizing your file, it is important that you keep it well organized so that you can always come back and re-edit quickly. Or if you're handing it off to someone to finish editing, it's good to have it organized that way for re-editing quickly. All right, checked over the naming systems, all look good. Another great thing to check right now is make sure that your photographic image layers, not your shadows or your filters, but any of your image layers should have been already converted into smart objects. They should not be left behind as regular static images. If they are at this stage, they have probably already incurred levels of pixel stretching because of rescaling that we've done over the course of the project. But they should be converted into smart objects. So please don't forget to do that. If you don't notice a little thumbnail icon like this in the corner of one of your photo layers, it's because it hasn't been converted yet. So make sure that those are smart objects. You should have masking layers attached to any photographic imagery that you have been cutting away imagery from. If you haven't, or if you don't have that, then what you've been doing instead is actually editing on top of your original image and not using a mask, which is, of course, problematic and also creates a destructive editing form, which means you probably ruined your original JPEG image in the process if you don't use a mask, by the way. So if that happened, you'll have to go reopen your image for whatever layer that was, re-edit it, add a mask and re-edit, and go back through the process of blending it back into the scene. So please make sure that you're following directions accurately when going through the project process so that you don't miss that kind of detail, because it could make for a much longer finishing process at the end. Okay, so we got smart objects, we've got masks for different layers that we've done editing on, we've got our shadow layers if you've got anywhere you need to add shadows, and those are the basic things. Other things you want to check here in your layer stack, which is the last area we're looking at, is to make sure there are no layers present in here that you no longer need in your design. Excess layers left inside of a Photoshop document can make the file size for your whole document much, much bigger very, very quickly. So my recommendation is deleting any of those excess layers that you have to save on file space, but also to clean up your file. If for some reason, though, you have layers that you have hidden or turned off, right? Like you have the eyeball turned off on, If you have those turned off but you're not ready to delete them or commit to removing them, you could hide them inside of a folder inside this region to help keep them away from your other layers. Folders are also a great way to help kind of keep your layer stack organized if you have lots of layers. I highly recommend using a folder. If you look down here at the bottom of your layer panel, there is a folder icon that creates what's called a group in Photoshop. But what it does is it allows you to drag layers down and into that folder to consolidate them into a single layer visually so that you don't have to worry about them as much. So that can be handy for specifically for separating groups of layers. Like if you have something you've edited in the foreground that doesn't interact with the background imagery, you can put it all into a folder that's called foreground imagery. And do the same with the background too. Keep in mind that the more you separate things out, that it can change the effect of layers that are interacting with them, like filters. So you have to make sure that you maintain order, that filters are still stacked above them if they're supposed to be. So those are just things to keep in mind. If you ever want to put something in a folder, watch this. I'm just going to grab multiple layers, and to do that, you just click on one, and you can hold Shift to grab one, several below, and it'll grab all in between. Click and drag and drop it directly over the folder. And now notice when I drop it in the folder lifts up above all of them, and these layers are now indented or tabbed over to the left or the right. And if I minimize the folder, they all disappear. So I control the folder down or expand it or minimize it to see those layers inside. And then it's a good idea to rename that according to whatever layer type of work is inside there. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that and delete that folder for now. All right. Okay, so again, get rid of excess layers. Don't leave stuff on in your screen. Make sure there's nothing left turned on in here that you don't want to be visible in your final output. The next thing to check is qualitatively looking over your design. Did you do the process correctly? Are images arranged in the way they're supposed to be in your image for your compositional design? Always review that stuff. So look around your image, make sure that your compositing work where you blended imagery together looks accurate, that it doesn't look sloppy, right? That you don't have shadows bleeding off into outside layers. Make sure they're clipped to appropriate layers. Make sure your blending is good between layers. Always review that stuff. Make sure they're looking correct. You may have to change or rearrange the order of a layer in order for something to appear in the correct location. Always come in, look for that stuff, zoom in close. Don't work from way back here to tell, okay? You can't tell anything from back here. You want to know absolute accuracy? Go to 100%. 100% actually represents kind of the equivalent viewing size for different types of outputs when you have it set to 100. So that's one way to check things quickly, is make sure you don't see anything weird at 100%. You can see it there, so can I. All right. And that's pretty much everything that we do for quality checking our file. Now we're ready to go ahead and start doing our file saving. So I'm going to do that in the next video. So again, double check your work fairly thoroughly, and always save if you had to make any changes. All right, we'll get back together in the next video.